Welcome, everyone. We are live with another episode of Level Up Law, where every Tuesday at noon, South Carolina Legal Services is leveling up your legal knowledge about an area of law that we practice in. I'm Senior Staff Attorney Susan Ingalls, here with our producer Kenneth Elliott, and you are viewing live Staff Attorney Elliott tape from our Charleston office. Elliott is our statewide education law unit head, and today he is bringing you Part 2 of your child's IEP, a section by section guide. Before we get started with Elliott's presentation, though, we do want to let you know that the presentation today is not legal advice, just general information for the public. If you do need the help of a lawyer for this or any other topic, call our intake line here at South Carolina Legal Services or apply online. You might be eligible for our free legal assistance. The information on how to apply will be provided at the end of Elliott's presentation today. And also, as a reminder, all of our episodes are posted on our YouTube channel by producer Kenneth Elliott, and that's usually within 24 hours. And I also do want to point out that South Carolina Legal Services provides online classrooms in this and other legal subjects. So be sure to check those out at learnthelaw.org. Also today, Elliott can answer general questions if there is time at the conclusion of the presentation. So put any questions you have in the question box. Hopefully we can get to those. Also, be sure to check out our social media, like, subscribe, and get all the up-to-date information that we provide here on Level Up Law, as well as all of our other resources. And those websites and social media handles can also be found on that last slide in Elliott's presentation today. All right, enough of that, Elliott. Let's get started.
Cool. Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Kenneth. All right, guys. So for those few of you who are returning guests, this is part 2 of probably 4 parts where we are doing a deep dive into your child's IEP. So the document that comprises of your child's IEP, we are going page by page through an actual IEP that's been redacted. We are looking at all the parts of it. We are talking about what those parts mean, why they're important. We are breaking down each little subsection, giving you tips and pointers from me and my colleagues as to how to advocate for certain things, what to look out for, pitfalls, that sort of thing. So if you guys remember, last time we spent, 50 minutes on one page, the first page of the IEP. So this is a deep dive, and as you know, a deep dive requires an underwater breathing apparatus. It requires, your ears are going to pop. You're going to feel some pressure. It's going to be dark and cold down there. So this isn't just, we're not just swimming on the surface here in the sunshine. We're getting deep. So buckle up for part 2 of your child's IEP. And again, probably 4 parts. I don't know. We'll see how far we get. We're definitely going to do more than one page. I promise you that. We'll do more than one page. This is, so again, a reminder, this is a part of our online classrooms that we're doing, learnthelaw.org. The title of our classroom, Education Law Issues and How to Handle Them. We've got a bunch of cool stuff going up there. We just recorded some videos, some a mock expulsion hearing and a mock manifestation determination review. We did that professionally with a partnership with the University of South Carolina School of Law and those folks. So we've got some cool stuff going up there. In addition to part 2, there's going to be a glossary of terms there. This area of law is it's full of acronyms that we just assume everyone knows. And I do not want to gloss over those, but we can't just have like a glossary. We can't have like a vocab section of this. So let me just refer you to the glossary of terms that's going to be on that website. And here, this is what we did last time in 1 hour. We did all this. So just to acclimate everyone to where we are, we got a kid who's in the 7th to 8th grade range. His primary area of disability is other health impairment. So this child has an ADHD diagnosis and an ODD diagnosis, right? So, and let me stop myself because of course those are some acronyms, some jargon. So ADHD most people are familiar with. attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and then ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. So this child has a specific mental health kind of diagnosis where when given difficult situations, especially meeting with opposition, typically from authority, they explode. They are unable to manage their emotions, that sort of thing. So here we are, y'all, page 2, we did it. So this begins an important section that I would say most people gloss over. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. You know, we've got acronyms for everything. There's sort of an acronym for this. It's PLAFP. It's not really cool. There's a double A in there and then like 2 weird consonants. So most people just call this present levels. But this is important because before we can move forward and set your child's goals for the next school year, we have to know where they are right now. And we talked a lot about data in the last episode. I'm going to talk a lot about data today because data is what we need to develop an appropriate IEP so that your child gets an appropriate education. So this section is all about determining where your child is and using data to corroborate that. Where your student is, and importantly, how their disability is impacting or affecting their involvement and their performance in the general education curriculum, all right? So, and a big beware that I wrote in here. This section is the section that most people gloss over because it's filled with a bunch of weird, unique concepts. It's got strange words, it's got odd phrases. It is overwhelming to sit and chew on this. It's even more difficult to swallow it and digest it. However, make sure you pay attention to the data that the school presents in this section. Ask questions, make sure the school explains the data to you because the odds are they might not fully understand it either. So if at any point in the IEP meeting in which you are reviewing this information, you go, wait a second, hold on. Like you should say that. If you've got an advocate or an attorney with you, you give them a little nudge and you say, hey, I don't know what's happening. I have no idea what's happening. And then your advocate or attorney can be like, hey, can we slow down for a second? We got some questions about that. This is your opportunity in an IEP meeting where you are reviewing this. This is your opportunity to ask questions and understand this. Because if the school moves on without any questions, they're just going to assume, and rightfully so, that you do understand it. So advocate for yourself and for your child while you're going through this. In this IEP, the present levels section covers 6 whole pages. That is admittedly a lot of information. But considering the complexity of neuroscience and psychology and behavioral science, and considering the importance of appropriately educating your student, you need that amount of information, that amount of data. So we're going to take this page by page today, looking at the present levels. Let me scroll down here. Here we go. All right, so how we got this information. How do we get this information? The 6 pages of present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. How do we get all this information? And let me kind of scroll through here. Like, this is a lot of stuff. Where does all this come from? Well, prior to the meeting, which we are kind of hypothetically in as we kind of go through these sections here, before you get to the IEP meeting where you are reviewing all this information in the form of a contract, which is the IEP, the school psychologist will have met with your child. And on a number of different occasions, we'll have facilitated examinations, tests with your child. And they'll also do some observations. They will talk to the teachers. They'll oftentimes, get information from you, the parent, the guardian. and then they will compile, analyze, extrapolate, interpret that data in a big, long report. And most of these are more than 20 pages long, because they should be doing, you know, a whole battery of examinations and evaluations. We gotta have data to figure out where your kid is and how their disability is impacting their learning. So there's a whole series of tests and examinations that they perform, and then those show up in this 20+ page document, typically called the evaluation. And that's a separate document that we're not looking at here, but this information is essentially cut and pasted from that. So all of the relevant information from the school psychologist's evaluation is going to be cut and pasted basically into this. So these 6 pages here come directly from the school psychologist's evaluation. This is what gives us the hard data. Now let me pause and talk about, I think there was a question last time even about this, about independent evaluations. So hopefully before you've gotten to this point, you've gotten a copy of the school's evaluation. It might even be just a couple days before the meeting, hopefully more than that, but that can happen sometimes, just a few days before. If you're reviewing it yourself, you're reviewing it with your lawyer, with your advocate, and y'all are going, I don't think this is right. This is confusing. This is not what I'm seeing. You have the right to ask for an independent evaluation, what we call an IEE, an independent educational evaluation. And you can ask for the school to pay for it. Now, if the school doesn't want to pay for it, then the school has to file a case against you, the parent, and that presents it to all of its interesting quandaries and issues, which we don't need to go into, but you need to get a lawyer if that's the case. But it's just an option because, you know, the school psychologist is a school employee, and they're typically just a master's level school psychologist. They don't practice independently. They don't have a license that allows them to work outside of the schools. It's a specific license that says that they can do school psychology within a school. And they essentially just perform these evaluations, interpret the data, and spit it out for the IEP team. You know, that can be very helpful. That can be sufficient. Sometimes their evaluations are not accurate. They're not sufficient. They're not appropriate. Is the legal standard is appropriate? They're not appropriate, whatever that means. And sometimes you just need a more specialized evaluator. And if that's the case, then you can ask the school to pay for that. But you know, and typically they oblige, but not all the time. But let's not get into that. That's a whole thing. I just tried a 2-day case on that, and we lost. The school did not have to pay for the independent evaluation, so I feel some kind of way about that. But let's leave that there. All right, so this particular IEP breaks the data down into strengths and weaknesses, strengths and needs. So we're starting with the strengths. Other IEPs might break this down into cognitive processing and academic achievement, which is typically how a school psychologist report's going to organize the data. And I kind of want to pause and talk about that. So again, cognitive processing and academic achievement instead of strengths and needs. I think I tend to see that more and more on IEPs. So it's probably, let's just kind of sit there and discuss that for a second. So cognitive processing. That is how well your child's brain works. So I like to imagine a brain that's suspended in a clear pool of goo that's hooked up to a bunch of wires that are running into various computers or machines, or sometimes a car that's up on a lift in a laboratory with cameras and computers that are testing every function. We want to know how fast that motor runs. We want to know how much it can hold, how quickly it can change directions, that sort of thing. So it's an intelligence test in a way, yes, but it's much more than that. So that's the cognitive processing part. of an evaluation or an IEP. The other part is academic achievement. So that's like putting that car on the track and testing to see how fast it can actually go on the track. So how well does it handle the turns? How does it do in the rain? Or in the educational context, we put the brain in the classroom. We see how well your student can actually perform doing grade level work. Can that brain read and write on grade level? Can it do grade level math? We want to know that. We want data showing whether or not and how well or how not so well your student does. So the data we get from both of these groups helps us determine what disability a child has and how that disability is actually impacting their learning, right? And let me hammer this again, because you've got two things you got to show to get an IEP, right? One is a disability, qualifying disability, and two is you have to prove that that disability impacts that child's learning such that they need specialized instruction, right? So that's what the evaluation is going to help determine. So back to this IEP here. About a month before the IEP meeting, the school psychologist administered the most used test to determine academic achievement here, and that's the Woodcock-Johnson achievement test. The results show that the student is in the average range in reading and writing. See, average, right? So again, so this is the Woodcock-Johnson, right? That's the name of the test, the 4th edition, the date that it was performed and by whom. There's a breakdown, basically reading, writing, and math. This is an oversimplification of the data, right? So, if I look at this, I go, oof, okay, well, either whoever made this IEP is trying to hide information from me, or the information just isn't as useful maybe in developing this IEP. So if a client brings just this to me, I go, I want to see the evaluator's evaluation. I want to see all the data, because this is a simplified summary of a very complex achievement test with a bunch of numbers and a bunch of data. And it's not just reading, writing, and math. There are a whole set of subsections under reading and a whole set of subsections under writing and math. So this is a oversimplification. And again, that doesn't mean that I'm calling foul on the IEP team or the person who drafted this IEP, because really it's honestly, to their credit, it's not really all that useful for this IEP. The reading is average, writing is average, math is low average. So maybe I'd expect more information in the IEP on this, especially if we want a goal related to math. So an important thing to keep in mind here is if you want an IEP goal, which again is the meat of the IEP, a goal is what your child's going to be seeking to achieve and what the school is going to be attempting to help your student achieve through instruction. And if you want that goal, then you need to refer to something in these 6 pages, the present levels section. You need to have some kind of data showing a deficit and a need in that area. So if you're mom, dad, grandparent, and you see that there's a need in math, then you're going to want to make sure that the math section, there is a lot of data supporting that your child needs some help. All right, so another note on the reading and writing parts. Those results are compared to the results of the previous evaluation, a different academic achievement called the WIAT, which is nearly identical, and that just means that so you see comparable to his previous WIAT 3 reading composite standard scale, standard score 92, right? So that just gives us some confidence that both tests are reliable, basically. It makes it more reliable because a previous test came up with a very almost exact score. So we're not thinking that the results of this test performed by Dr. Wilson is absurd or crazy or not appropriate, because it falls in the same range as the previous evaluation. Let's see here. So the math section is a little more complex, like we talked about, students in the low average range, and that's compared to students in the same age range, same level nationwide. But the school psychologist broke the score down into some different pieces, which is helpful to help us understand the student's specific problems or deficits, right? So that's why this section is a little bit more. So math application and math fluency are average, while math calculations are within the low average. So this is likely due to the identified deficits in executive functioning, specifically planning, rather than deficit in math calculations. Now, y'all here, buckle up. We're getting in the weeds here, y'all. Let's do this thing, okay? So just take a second. We're gonna digest this together. Keep in mind this student's disabilities, ADHD and ODD, right? So what impact does the ADHD have on learning, right? Well, you know, they don't have the attention span necessarily to be thinking ahead, to be planning. They don't have the attention to sit and think through and finish a complex math problem, right? I mean, you know, the harder math gets, the more time it takes to just do one problem, right? So 7th, 8th grade, you know, this child is inching towards algebra. And algebra requires multiple steps, and a kid with ADHD might not have the attention span to sit and complete a math problem necessarily. So we're essentially where the evaluator is highlighting that the ADHD is impacting math, not because the child has a specific learning disability necessarily in the area of math, but the attention issues are impacting math. So that is what this whole section is talking about. Likely to the identified deficits in executive functioning, rather than deficit in math calculations. And you know, I'm going to want to see some numbers on that. I'm going to want to, if we're going through this in the IEP meeting, I'm going to say, hold on, can we go to the evaluation? I want to see exactly what kind of data we've got there. In part because I want to know myself, but I also want to make sure that the school knows that we are looking at this closely. And I want to make this school psychologist refer back to her evaluation, his evaluation. And special note on this, that's the psychologist, the school psychologist theory, right? You know, it can sometimes be softer science. You know, it's not chemistry necessarily. But so this is the psychologist's theory, and it can be tested, it can be disproven. But I think in light of what we know about this kid and what I know as the attorney, seems right, seems to be appropriate. Gosh, I've got a note here that I think I've already covered. Yeah, so functional strengths. So this is a pretty small section, right? It's typically it looks beyond schoolwork, right? So it looks at things like life skills, behavior, communication, that sort of thing. Most of the time, the section can be pretty brief, but unless your child has a disability that impacts life skills, behavior, communication, that sort of thing. So a child maybe with certain forms of autism, you might have a lot more in here. Maybe a child with more delicate kind of medical conditions would have more in here. You know, but the IEP, you know, in our example here, needs to have something to say about life skills and communication. In a practice tip that we wrote in here, the functional strength section is a great place for a parent, guardian to jump in with some input. Is your student great at helping around the house? Do they love to cook? Are they respectful to people of authority? You know, let the team know. The team wants to know how that child does at home. Because again, one of the goals of the overarching federal legislation that that authorizes IEPs, the IDEA, one of the goals is to prepare these kids to be productive members of society, to go out and get a job, to certainly care for themselves. And the IEP needs to keep that in mind as this child gets older and older. You know, 7th, 8th grader should be able to certainly do most of their own things on their own, right? From getting up and bathing themselves to preparing simple food, that sort of thing. So, guys, we did it. We made it past page 2. We're doing more than one page today, I promised, and I am making good on that promise. Let me sip some tea, Susie, and ask you, are there any questions or comments so far?
We do have one question, Elliot, and that is, do you have to get permission if you want a clinical diagnosis?
Do you have to get permission if you want a critical diagnosis?
Clinical
diagnosis. Oh, interesting. Now, this is a great question. Yeah, so school psychologists, you know, they can't diagnose with clinical diagnoses, right? That's outside of their license, that's outside of the purview of their job under the IDEA. So that's what your child's doctors are going to do. If your child's doctor, pediatrician, psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist diagnoses them under their license with something clinical, then you bring that to the team, and the team reviews it. Now there are different, you know, the DSM, for instance, is a little bit different than maybe the criteria used for diagnosing kids under an IDEA kind of thing. But anyway, we don't need to get in the weeds of that. That's a little bit over my head too. But yes, but also I'm not trusting a school psychologist to diagnose a kid. And again, I don't think that they can. I think that's outside of the purview of the IDEA and their license. So I leave that to the child's medical team. Good question. Certainly someone who's practicing in this area and is asking that question and thinking about it. So thank you for that. And if whoever asked that question, or if anyone in the chat has some more thoughts about that, please let us know. We can maybe revisit it. Cool. That was it, Susie?
Yes, sir. That's all for now. I'm sure there will be
cool.
more. And that,
all right.
I will say this: the person who did ask that question is a parent.
Oh, cool.
She's a parent, and said that she was told by the school that she had to get it. So.
Yeah, I mean, so you can get qualified for an IDEA without having any kind of diagnosis from your doctor, but odds are you're going to get one pretty easily from your doctor. They're less resistant than the IEP team. So the IEP team is charged with, they have the affirmative responsibility to qualify this kid with for special services if their disability requires it. So yeah, so you don't have to, but it's certainly, in my experience, it's just easier to do it that way. You bring the diagnosis from your doctor, and the school says, okay, looks like Dr. So-and-so says you got it, so I'm not gonna fight it too much. So, again,
right, let me throw one more question at you.
Uh-oh.
What should a parent request to include positive data from the general education classroom? In other words, learning from observing, empathy, learns from tangibles, and that sort of thing, because the school. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's the end of it. I'm sorry.
Wait, what was the first part of that question, Susie?
What should a parent request to include positive, that's in quotes, data from the gen ed classroom? For example, learning from observing, empathy, learns from tangibles, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's whatever's helpful in developing the IEP. And if you want to give a fuller picture of your child, I think that's important. I think it's a good point. I think that this person's making, that like a lot of times we're just focused on the negative, right? The deficits and the needs, instead of focusing on the strengths. But again, the purpose of the IDEA and the IEP is to target the needs. So if the positive information is helpful in crafting the IEP because it helps us maybe say, well, so they're good at this but not this, then yeah, then put it in. But again, like we are targeting deficit areas. That's why we have an IEP. So yeah, it's almost like kind of like a tone thing. If you feel uncomfortable with the tone of the IEP because it's so focused on the negative, hey, like mention some positive things. Let's especially the kids in the room, right? If you got like an older kid, middle school, high school kid who's participating in this thing, definitely you want to fill some spots with positive reinforcement, focusing on the good stuff. But again, is it helpful in developing the IEP? Not really.
This audience member says it's helpful to support LRE. Right.
Yeah, the least restrictive environment. Yeah, I guess that's true. So the LRE, the least restrictive environment, right? So that's one of the main things that you're thinking about in determining placement for a child is we have to put that child in the least restrictive environment, meaning we want to keep them in the general ed classroom as much as possible. So we're not keeping special ed kids in a closet. We want them to be in regular ed, general ed education as much as possible, and we support them, pull them out as necessary. So yeah, that's a good point, that it can support a decision on placement, keeping them in the least restrictive environment, for sure.
Okay, carry on.
Good job, y'all. You guys are smart. You guys are smart. Okay, where are we? So here we are, page 3. Checking my time. We're doing good. Okay, so to remind you again, this IEP splits it up into strengths and needs. So now we're in the needs section. So to go to that audience member's point, we've got a little half page on strengths, basically, and then we've got 5 full pages on needs, right? So keep in mind this, again, the student's disability is other health impairment because of ADHD and ODD, which are mental health diagnoses which impact their behavior primarily, right? So the needs section in this IEP is going to focus primarily on behaviors. Additionally, you'll notice that most of the assessments performed in this evaluation are geared towards students with ADHD or behavioral issues. So your student might not have these same evaluations because they might not have behavioral issues. They might just, if you have a specific learning disability, then you might not need to do these evaluations. So where are we here? The CAS 2, or so the Cognitive Assessment System 2nd edition was performed on this date by the doctor, the school psychologist. You see, a brief, still kind of complicated explanation of what it is, a measure of intellectual functioning based upon a group of cognitive processes. These processes are planning, attention, simultaneous, and successive, excuse me. And essentially this is a test to look and see if this child's ADHD is impacting their learning, basically, right? So again, this is a cognitive processing test. So think of it like the brain suspended in goo. The car is up on a lift, right? So the car's not on the track. We're not testing to see how fast that car can go yet. That car's up on a lift in the shop, and we're looking to see how fast can the wheels spin, that sort of thing. How fast can that engine run? So unsurprisingly, this kid's ADHD is impacting them in the areas related to their attention or inattention. planning, attention, executive functioning with working memory. Student will need to be taught skills specific to the above areas and needs such as making decisions about how to complete schoolwork, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so when you see something like this, where the evaluator and whoever's drafting this IEP puts in something like this, the student will need to be taught specific skills related to these whatever. You want to circle this and say, great, awesome. So it sounds like this person's already planning to put an IEP goal to address this. So the school psychologist has identified a deficit related to this child's disability in need of specialized instruction. So this child needs to be taught skills to assist in these areas. Great, I'm circling this, I'm making a note of it because I want something like this to appear in a goal. Because again, all this data is to help us develop the goals. So good, I'm circling this, highlighting it, making a note. I want to see a goal on this. All right, and that's just a practice tip too. Like if once you identify a deficit area, you should be circling it, highlighting it, and making a note to say, I want to see a goal later in this IEP. We're going to have goals. I want to see a goal on that. Good. So then we've got social. Where are we? Oh, the brief 2 test, a rating scale. Man, I almost blew by this. Rating scales. Okay, so what's a rating scale? A rating scale is essentially the school psychologist will identify a couple teachers that have regular interaction with the student, and oftentimes the teacher, the parent as well. So a couple teachers and the parent, you send them a link basically, and you do it online. It's just you're filling out bubbles basically, and there's a 5 or 10 point scale and a bunch of different questions, and the teachers and the parent are filling in those bubbles, rating this child, right? So it's what we call a subjective objective test. It's based on your perception. You're filling in those bubbles based on your perception. So that's a this behavior rating scale of an inventory of executive functioning was performed. This is completed during the most recent evaluation by parent, the ELA teacher, and a math teacher. Good. So that is standard. I want to see all 3 of those, especially because we noticed before that math seemed to be an area where the ADHD was possibly impacting. So it was smart for this evaluator to go to the math teacher with this rating scale for sure. Areas in which all 3 respondents, so parent and both teachers, responded rating this child clinically significant. So that is the the most elevated of all the ranges, clinically significant in 4 of these things. And the child rated himself too, or herself, rated themselves. Got it. It says himself, oops, to be clinically significant in the range of self-monitoring. So it's always good to kind of check in with the student and say, how does this student think they're doing? But clearly the adults in his life agree that he's got some significant areas in emotional control and regulation, behavior regulation, and inhibitions, right? That's classic ADHD, right? Classic ADHD. All right. So, both of these tests confirm what the child's doctor has seen, that there's sufficient evidence to diagnose this child with ADHD, and we're building the case that there's an impact on his learning. There's a special note here for this. There are dozens of tests and assessments at the disposal of the school. Which ones are appropriate, which ones are reliable? That's an important question. It's kind of impossible to answer abstractly, but an experienced education attorney, child psychologists, a good advocate going to be able to answer that for you. Again, there are dozens of evaluations available. So, you know, that's where you as the parent, you can just go ask someone, go ask a professional if it's appropriate. And part of what an independent evaluator is going to do is look at the school psychologist evaluation and determine, well, was the brief 2 appropriate for this kid? Was the CAS 2 appropriate for this kid? Is it getting at the information that we need to help develop the IEP, to understand this kid, to develop the right data for this IEP? That's what your expert is going to be able to do for you if you go the route of requesting an IEE. So, social emotional needs, you know, the BAS 3 and the Connors were the ones that were administered, and teacher and parent, again, these are, you know, rating scales. Significant, clinically significant hyperactivity, aggression, conduct problems, attention problems. Profile supports the medical diagnosis of ADHD, ODD. Currently has a medical diagnosis, right? So we want to make sure that we've got some data to support that doctor's diagnosis, and there it is, right? Same thing with the Connors. Teacher and parent did it. Rating scale indicates very elevated scores of inattention hyperactivity, right? So both teacher and parent indicated that the student's behavior seriously affected his schoolwork, friendships, and relationships. Ding, 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 right? Really important. Now we are fulfilling that second question, which is, you know, does the disability impact their learning such that they need some specialized instruction? So, yeah, we're blowing through this. We got page 3 done. Let's do one more for funsies, huh?
All right, before you get that one started, I have another question for you.
Okay, Susie.
If the cognitive assessment does not meet state guidelines for approving an IEP, can the IEP team still agree to special education services based on data that shows deficits affecting the student ability to learn in some areas?
Of course, yeah, definitely. That's a great question. Sounds like the person who asked that kind of knew the answer, but it's good. That's good information for people to know. So, yeah, complex question with an easy answer. Yep.
All right, that's it for now. Continue.
Cool. All right. Now we're going to look at some data about this child in the classroom. So again, we're going to take that car off the lift, put it on the track, and see how that car performs on the racetrack. The antecedent behavior consequence analysis. These people with their PhDs, they are so great at naming things, isn't it? The antecedent behavior consequence. I mean, it's if you know what those words mean, it's really accurate, but it's just not good marketing. So antecedent behavior consequence, let's break that down. So an antecedent is what happens right before the behavior. So essentially, like, antecedent behavior consequence is a timeline. It's a series of events. We got the antecedent, which is what happened right before this kid did something we find less desirable, something that violated the code of conduct, let's say, that ended up in a referral. What happened right before that? That is the antecedent. What is the behavior? Well, that's the thing, the rule-breaking activity. And then what's the consequence? So what happened? Did they get suspended? Or consequence is an interesting, because this also kind of looks at kind of what a functional behavioral assessment would look at is like, what is the target? Like, what is that kid trying to accomplish by that, right? Like, what are they trying to do? So this is really cool because it breaks it down into time of day, location, because certain kids, you know, if it's obvious that a child is having more difficulty in the morning than the afternoon, then we should look at that and see why. Is there a reason? Maybe it's just like being a kid, but maybe there's something significant that we can address. Location. Is it in a particular classroom? You know, this should be maybe more specific. So we've got core class and connections class, which essentially is just like the gen ed class versus the special ed class, right? I want to know more. I want to know, is he acting out in math because he's having difficulty understanding and following through, or is it happening all over the place? You know, if we help him in math, is that going to significantly minimize his behavioral issues because he won't be acting out in math because he's not frustrated anymore? That's information that I'm going to want to know in this, which it doesn't really give at this point. So we've got, here's this one. So from 2 to 3 p.m. seems to be the most common, but you know, it's essentially, we've got 13, we got 12, and we got 11 incidents. So it's happening all throughout the day. So question about when it happens, not really all that significant. I guess it's not happening early in the morning now that I look at this. Seems to be lunch and later. No, you know what? I'm gonna retract what I said. That's pretty interesting, right? Is he tired? Is he hungry? That's, you know, are his meds wearing off? I don't know. So the common antecedent, given a directive or correction, right? So get back in your seat, stop talking to your neighbor. What is the behavior of the student? Verbal refusal with profanity. So screw off, teacher, I'm not sitting down, or, you know, go screw, I'm gonna keep talking to my friend, right? So 62% of the time, that's the reaction. Common consequence, removal or walk out. So either he's getting removed because he's going to the principal's office, or he'll just walk out. Did the student return to schedule? Only one of these is answered no. So I'm gonna be like, okay, well, what about this? Like, what? And that just essentially means, you know, did they get suspended? Did they have to go home? Were they able to calm down and go back to class? Which is essentially what we want him to be, right? We want him to calm down, remove himself, and then get back to class. So that's what this information is giving us, right? And here's a little summary. Common triggers to behavior include being given a directive or correction by an adult when in front of peers. So middle school boy, worried about how his peers are perceiving him, right? This child's response confirms the results of the Connors and the Basque, right? So again, we are seeing exactly what we'd expect to see from the data, that he's just having some issues controlling his emotions, right? So how are we doing on time here? Let's keep going through the behavioral needs. The school looked at how often the student was receiving a referral. This is also some information about the 3 most common behaviors which resulted in actual disciplinary action. And this information is really helpful in developing goals later in the IEP because it sets our baseline, where the student's right now. I'm always thinking about that as I'm going through here is, okay, cool. So what is our baseline? Where are we right now, and where could we be? Always thinking about goals, always thinking about goals. So this poor kid had a tough fall. November and December, look at the amount of school days, like 17 and 14 days, and the number of incidents exceed the number of days. And you know, it's like, well, did you get like 10 one day? So the data is not like super accurate about, like, I want to know number of number of days with incidents is a more appropriate, I think, data point there. But essentially, what this shows is that every single day in November and December, he had some kind of an incident that resulted in a referral. To which I go, why did it take us so long to get to this point? Like, why would you let that happen, school? You're letting 32 incidents happen in November, and what are you doing? For more information on that, you can seek our resources on manifestation determination reviews, because there are certain things that are triggered once a certain number of suspensions happen, or if the pattern of behavior is such that we need to get back to the table and see what we can do to help this child, right? And then it looks like in January 16th, there was a hearing. Oh, thank goodness. You know, you let 7, 17, 32, 30 incidents happen, and finally we're having a hearing with a new behavior plan. Thank goodness. And then what happened? So yeah, here's the total, 91 incidents. And then for the second semester, things got a little bit better, right? So we only had 50 instead of 90. But still, like, it's a lot of incidents, right? So at some point you go, at some point in late July, early February, you go, it's not working. That's maybe a point that your advocate or attorney should bring up, is like, hey, what the heck, man? Like, what are you doing? You should be intervening much sooner than this. I digress. Summary: as the year has progressed, the student has increased in frequency and intensity of behaviors, despite the school's efforts to provide behavior interventions. Most common behavior resulting in a disciplinary referral include leaving class, major disruption, refusal to obey, right? So this is good information, not just to show us that the school is severely inadequate in treating this child's behavioral issues, but going forward, we now have a good baseline, which is that this kid gets referred a lot. Whatever's been happening in school is, I don't know, man, not working. So anyway, so that is where we are, guys. We made it to page 4. We did 2, 3, and 4. There's only what, 10 more pages to go. So Susie, any questions, any comments? I'm getting a little bit heated over here. Just calm down.
No more questions, it looks like, for today, but I know everyone will look forward to part 3. So
oh yeah,
definitely.
let's zoom ahead. Part 3, we got it scheduled September 13th at noon.
Yeah, I'll be ready. We'll put out the announcement and the registration link about a week before, but you can always go on our website and look at our calendar there to find out what the topic is every week on Level Up Law. So I want to thank Elliot Tate, attorney in our Charleston office, for an excellent presentation. As you can tell, he's very knowledgeable, and that's why he's our education law unit head. This is really an important area of law, but especially right now as school is starting. So thank you, Elliot. And let's just let our audience know that we do handle education legal issues, as you mentioned, and we look forward to people asking us for assistance when they need it. We already have one person in the question box saying, "Can I hire you as my attorney?"
No.
Don't blame me for that question at all.
That's so, very sweet. Yeah, if you want to try, you gotta call legal aid or go on the website and apply. If you make too much money, I can't represent you.
Now, also thanks to our audience. If you found this presentation helpful and you know it might be helpful to others, or if you just think it might be helpful to others, please do go to our YouTube channel tomorrow at SC Legal Services and share the broadcast out to all of your own followers or anybody that you think might need some help in this area. Because when you do that, so many more people are going to get this good information, and they'll be able to join us for episode 3 in September. And also, while you're there, be sure to give this a like, a thumbs up on our YouTube channel, because it certainly was very good. And you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more content like this and on other subjects. And if you sign up for those notifications while you're there, you will get a notification every time we post a video on YouTube, not just a new episode of Level Up Law, but every time we post any kind of video. So be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Level Up Law on Tuesday at noon. We'll be talking about the law of door-to-door sales in South Carolina. Who knew? There's some specific laws about that, and we'll be telling you about those. So thanks again, Elliot, and thanks to our audience for tuning in today on Level Up Law. That does conclude today's webinar. We'll see you next time.